For those who are sensitive in the spirit, you can clearly tell that something big is coming in the days ahead, especially in the month of March. God is merciful to us, revealing what is coming and also showing us how to prepare against it. Many of the things God has revealed in the past have come to pass, especially the ones where God called believers to pray. But not much attention was given to that call. Well, today's experience confirms 4 events that will come upon us, and I want you to stay and watch this video to the end, so you do not fall victim when these events begin to unfold. Kindly tell us where you are watching from, so that we can connect and pray with you. Also, please share this video with at least 2 friends and family members, so they can get ready as well. I will now begin reading today's experience. My name is Dorothy Mae Collins, and I am 62 years old. I live in a small town in Georgia, and I have seen a lot of things in my life. I raised 3 children, mostly by myself after my husband passed. I worked as a school teacher for over 30 years. I am not the kind of person who talks too much about things she cannot explain. I like facts. I like things I can see and touch and understand. So, when I tell you what happened to me on the 8th of February 2026, I need you to know that I am not the kind of woman who makes things up. I am not the kind of person who looks for attention. What I am about to share with you is something that changed me completely. It changed how I see the world. It changed how I see people around me. It changed how I pray and how I sleep at night, and I believe with everything inside me that I was sent back to tell it. Let me start from the beginning, because the beginning matters. In January of 2026, I had been feeling some pain in my abdomen for a few weeks. I kept telling myself it was nothing serious. I told myself it was probably just something I ate, or maybe the cold weather getting to me. I am the kind of woman who does not like to make a fuss. I do not like hospitals. I never did. Even when I was younger and something was wrong, I would wait until I absolutely could not wait anymore before I went to see a doctor. My daughter, Renee, she kept telling me to go and get checked. She would call me every other day asking me how I was feeling. I would tell her I was fine even when I was not fine. That is just how I am. I do not want to worry the people I love, but by the end of January, the pain had gotten worse. It was not just a dull ache anymore. It was the kind of pain that woke me up in the middle of the night, the kind that made me hold my side when I walked from the bedroom to the kitchen. Renee came to visit me one weekend, and she saw me wincing when I stood up from my chair, and she did not let it go this time. She drove me to the doctor herself the very next morning and sat right there with me in the waiting room with her arms folded like she was not moving until someone saw her mother. The doctor ran some tests and found something that needed to be taken care of right away. There was a growth near one of my organs, and it had been sitting there pressing against things it should not have been pressing against. The doctor told me that surgery was the best option, and that the sooner we did it, the better. He said it in a calm and professional way, but I could see in his eyes that he was not playing around. Renee grabbed my hand when he said that, and I just sat there very still, trying to take it all in. The surgery was scheduled for the 8th of February 2026. I remember that morning very clearly. I woke up early, before my alarm. The house was quiet. The sun had not fully come up yet. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, just looking at the floor. I was not panicking. I was just very aware that something felt different about that morning. It is hard to explain. It was like the air in the room was heavier, like the morning itself was watching me. I got up and went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, even though I was not supposed to eat or drink anything before the surgery. I did not drink it. I just made it and held the warm cup in my hands and stared out the window at my backyard. The trees were bare because it was still winter. The yard looked empty and gray, and I remember thinking to myself that I should have put more flowers in that yard when I had the chance. Renee picked me up at 6 in the morning. She was trying to keep things light. She was talking about her kids and something funny her youngest son had said the night before. I smiled and nodded, but my mind was somewhere else. When we got to the hospital and they took me back to prep me for surgery, she held my hand one more time and told me everything was going to be okay. I told her I loved her. I meant it with everything I had. They wheeled me into the operating room, and I remember the ceiling tiles above me as the bed moved through the hallway. I remember the bright lights in the operating room and how cold it was in there. I remember a nurse telling me to count backwards from 10. I remember getting to 7. And then I remember nothing. What happened next is the part that I have tried to explain to people. And most of them just look at me with that polite kind of look. That means they do not really believe me, but they do not want to say so. But I am going to tell it anyway because it is true. Every single word of it is true. At some point during that surgery, something went wrong. I found out later from Renee that there had been a complication. My blood pressure dropped suddenly and my heart stopped. The doctors worked on me for several minutes trying to bring me back. Renee was in the waiting room and someone came out and told her that they were doing everything they could, and she fell apart right there in that waiting room. She told me later that she dropped to her knees right there on the floor of that hospital, and she prayed out loud, and she did not care who heard her. But during those minutes when my heart had stopped and the doctors were fighting to bring me back, I was somewhere else entirely. I did not feel myself leave my body. There was no dramatic moment where I floated up and looked down at myself on the table. It was not like that. One moment there was nothing, and then the next moment I was standing somewhere. And I was standing completely upright, and I felt no pain at all. The pain that had been in my side for weeks was completely gone. My knees, which had been giving me trouble for years, felt perfectly fine. I felt light in a way I had not felt since I was maybe a young woman in my 20s. That lightness itself was strange enough to make me stop and look around me. The place I was in was not dark, and it was not bright either. It was somewhere in between, like the kind of light you get on an overcast afternoon when the clouds are covering the sun. But there is still enough light to see everything clearly. I was standing on what felt like ground, but I could not tell you exactly what it looked like because my attention was pulled almost immediately to the people around me. And the people are what I want to tell you about, because that is where this whole thing started to get into something I could not understand on my own. There were people everywhere. Not crowded in an uncomfortable way, but spread out as far as I could see in every direction. Men and women, old people and young people, children too, and every single one of them was going about what looked like their own business. They were walking and standing, and some looked like they were in conversation with each other. But what caught my eye was not the people themselves. It was what they were carrying around their necks. Every person there had something hanging around their neck. At first, when I saw it from a distance, I thought they were carrying signs like the kind of signs people hold up at protests or sporting events. But as I looked closer, I realized it was not that at all. What each person was carrying was more like a clock. But it was not like any clock I had ever seen before. It was flat and thin, and it hung from a strap around each person's neck, and it rested against their chest. And when I got close enough to see it properly, I saw that it had 3 sections on it. One section showed hours, one showed minutes, and one showed seconds. And the numbers were moving, not fast, but steady, ticking down just like a countdown clock. I did not understand what I was seeing right away. I just moved around looking at people and looking at what they were carrying. And the first thing I noticed was that the numbers on each one were completely different from person to person. Some of the clocks showed very large numbers, hours in the hundreds, minutes and seconds following accordingly. Those people and I paid attention to this. Most of them were older people, seniors, people who looked like they were in their 60s and 70s and even older than that. Their clocks had so much time on them that the numbers were almost hard to read because they were so high. But then I started looking at the younger people, and that is when something inside me got very unsettled. Because the younger ones, people who looked like they were in their 20s and 30s and even teenagers, many of them had clocks that were ticking down very fast, and the numbers on their clocks were small. Alarmingly small. Some of them had hours in the single digits. Some of them had numbers I did not even want to look at too long, because something in me understood what those small numbers meant, even before anyone explained it to me. There was one young man I remember specifically. He could not have been more than about 25 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him by any measure a person on earth would use. He was tall and healthy looking. He was smiling at something, and the clock around his neck was counting down in a way that made my stomach sink. The numbers were very low. I looked at an older woman standing not far from him. She had deep wrinkles on her face, and her back was a little bent, and she walked slowly. But the clock around her neck had numbers that would take a very long time to run out. I kept walking and looking. And the more I looked, the more I saw the same pattern. The old ones mostly had more time. The young ones mostly had less. And I could not make sense of that at all, because in the world I came from, it is supposed to be the other way around. The young are supposed to have more time, and the old ones are supposed to be winding down. That is just how life works, or at least that is how I always understood it to work. But what I was seeing was telling a completely different story, and I did not know what to do with that. I was standing there trying to work out what it all meant, and I kept looking from person to person, and the unease I felt was growing. I was not afraid exactly, but I was disturbed in a deep way. There was something very wrong about what I was looking at, even though I could not name exactly what it was yet. Then the scene around me began to change. It did not happen in a dramatic way. It was more like when you are watching something and then your eyes are drawn in a different direction, and when you look back, the first thing is shifted. The people with their clocks were still there, but my attention was being pulled somewhere else. It was not like a hand grabbing me or a voice calling me. It was more like when you smell food cooking and your feet just start moving toward the kitchen before you even decide to. Something was pulling me and I went. What I moved toward was a building, and the building was old. When I say old, I do not mean old, like a house that has not been painted in a while. I mean old the way things look in history books when you see pictures of buildings from thousands of years ago. The stones that made it up looked like they had been there longer than I could even imagine. But the building was not in ruins. It was solid and firm, and from every window, and from the cracks around the door, light was pouring out. Not regular light. Something different. Something that had a warmth to it, that I could feel even before I got close. I kept moving toward it, and the closer I got, the more I could see. The building looked like it had a certain size to it from the outside, like something with walls and a roof and clear boundaries, the kind of building you could walk around and measure if you wanted to. But when I reached the door and something moved me through it, I stopped completely, because what was on the inside was nothing like what the outside had suggested. From the outside, it looked like a building with rooms. From the inside, it looked like an entire world. The space went on in every direction. Up, sideways, deep. There were no walls where walls should have been. There was no ceiling where a ceiling should have been. What I was standing in felt like it had its own sky, its own sense of space, its own everything. It was like the outside of the building was just a shell, and the real thing was inside, and the real thing was endless. And in this space there were angels, many of them. I am not going to try to describe exactly what they look like, because I do not think my words would do it properly. But they were there, and they were moving, and they were working. They were going between what looked like shelves, rows and rows and rows of shelves that held scrolls. Scrolls like the old kind, made of what looked like parchment and rolled up and placed carefully in their places, and those shelves had no end. When I looked up, they went up, and there was no top. When I looked to the sides, left or right, the shelves went on, and there was no end. There were more scrolls in that place than I think any number I know could describe. I stood there completely still and completely confused, because on the outside that building had boundaries, but in here it was as if the inside of that building held everything that had ever existed all at once. I could not make sense of it. My mind kept trying to do what minds do, which is compare it to something familiar. But there was nothing familiar to compare it to, and none of the angels looked at me. They were all going about what they were doing with a kind of focus and purpose that made me feel like I was invisible. I stood there not knowing what to do or where to go or whether I was supposed to be there at all. And then I noticed one angel who was different from the rest. While all the others were moving with purpose in various directions, this one was standing still, and he was looking at me. Not with surprise, not like he had just noticed me, but with the kind of look a person has when they have been waiting for someone and that someone has just arrived. He came toward me, and when he got close, he told me I was welcome. He said something about this being the part of life where things are real in a way they cannot be on earth. He said it in a calm and simple way, like it was just the truth, and there was no need to dress it up. I told him I did not understand where I was. He did not seem troubled by my confusion. He just nodded like he expected it. And then he began to explain things to me. And what he explained to me is the reason I am alive today, writing these words down and sharing them with anyone who will read them. He told me that in this place every soul on earth is seen, not just seen the way people see each other on the street or in a photograph, seen completely, their condition, their state, their path. He told me that what goes on in the lives of people on earth is not hidden here. Everything is open. And then he said something that hit me like a wave of cold water. He told me that one of the most painful things they witness from this place is how the devil works on people. He did not just mean the devil causes general trouble. He described it in a way that made it sound very calculated, very targeted. He told me that the devil studies each soul, learns what that soul is vulnerable to, and then moves with the specific aim of pulling that person toward death before their time. Not just any kind of harm, but the kind of harm that stops a person from walking into what God put them here to do. I remember standing there taking that in, and I asked him in my heart, because speaking out loud did not seem necessary there. I asked him what he meant by before their time, and he picked that up immediately and began to explain. He told me that it is God's plan for every person to live long enough to fulfill what they were placed here to fulfill, to experience God's goodness, to know His love, and to finish the work that was given to them. He was very clear about this. He said God does not design a short life for anyone. God does not look at a young person and plan for them to leave the earth before they have had a chance to live. That is not God's heart. That has never been God's heart. What God intends is for His people to live and to finish well. But then he said the other side of that. He told me that the devil knows this, and because the devil knows this, his entire strategy is to cut that short, to take people out before they reach what God has for them, and not just randomly. The devil has plans, organized, deliberate plans. He told me that what I had seen when I was walking among those people with the clocks around their necks was a picture of where things stood, and that picture was troubling because a great many people, especially young people, had very little time left, not because God designed it that way, but because the enemy had been working on them and was about to do something more. And that is when he said something that made me want to sit down even though there was nowhere to sit. He told me that the devil had plans specifically for the month of March, and that what he was planning to do in March was going to cut the time on many of those clocks in half. More than half in some cases. That thing I had seen with the young people showing less time than the old people was already a sign of what had already been done to them. What was coming would make it worse. He told me that the reason many of the senior people I had seen had more time on their clocks was not because they were luckier, or because life naturally gives old people more time. It was because of where they stood with God. Those older people had reached a place in their lives where they understood that their relationship with God was the most important thing they had. They had lived enough to know that God's love was real, and that walking with Him was not something they were willing to give up for anything. And that kind of life creates a protection around a person that the enemy finds very difficult to break through. It does not mean they are perfect. It means they are rooted, and their roots were what was giving them time. But the younger people, many of them, had not gotten there yet, and the devil knew it. And he was going to use that gap to do what he does. Then the angel told me he was going to show me the 4 main things the devil was planning to release starting in March. He said 4 strategies the enemy was going to begin operating with that would pull many people toward early graves if nothing changed. And I want to tell you what he showed me and explained to me, because this is the part that I feel the most urgency about. This is the part that woke me up on that hospital bed and made me feel like I had been sent back with something in my hands that I was supposed to give away. The first thing he revealed to me was about depression. And when he said this word, I almost felt like I already knew it was coming, because I have watched enough people around me to see what depression can do. But what he described was not just the ordinary sadness that life sometimes brings. He told me that in March there was going to be a deliberate and very targeted release of the spirit of depression across many people's lives. He used the word release, the way you would talk about releasing something that was being held and then set loose all at once, like opening a door and letting something flood out. He explained to me how it would work. People would begin to feel heavy, not just tired or stressed, heavy in a way that goes deeper than the body. They would wake up in the morning and feel like there was no reason to get up. They would look at the people they love and feel strangely disconnected from them. Things that used to bring them joy would start to feel meaningless. And the most dangerous part of what he described was the way this spirit would work on a person's thinking. Because when you are deep in that kind of depression, your mind starts to tell you lies. And the lies it tells you are specifically designed to make you feel like you are a burden to the people around you. Like the world would be better without you, like there's no way out of the pain except one. He was describing the road to suicide. He was showing me how the enemy would use depression as a vehicle to drive people toward taking their own lives. And the people he described were not just people who were already struggling. He told me that many of the people who would be hit by this in March would be people who seemed perfectly fine on the outside. People who were functioning, people who were showing up to work and going to family events and doing all the things a regular person does. But on the inside, the weight would be building and building, and nobody around them would know because they were too good at carrying it quietly. He told me something else about this that I want you to hear carefully. He said that God's love for each person is the one thing that the spirit of depression is specifically designed to block. Because if a person can truly receive the knowledge that God loves them, not just as a fact they know in their head, but as something they feel in their chest, it becomes very hard for depression to keep a hold on them. Depression needs a person to feel alone and unloved and forgotten. And when you know that God sees you, and that He knows your name, and that He cares about what you are going through, depression does not have the same grip. That is why the strategy is to cut people off from that understanding, to make them feel like maybe God is not paying attention. Maybe God does not really care about them personally. Maybe they are just one of billions, and their struggle does not register anywhere in heaven. The angel told me that lie is one of the most powerful weapons the enemy has, and that in March it would be used heavily. He urged me with a kind of seriousness in his voice to tell people that God knows them, God sees them, and depression was never, not for 1 second, any part of what God intended for their lives. The second thing he showed me was about appetite. And I want to be careful how I say this because it is not just about food, even though food is part of it. He described a coming increase in the appetite for things that damage people from the inside, starting with what we eat. He told me that in March and going forward, people would find themselves craving things they knew were not good for them in a way that was stronger than usual. Processed food, heavy food, things that were made in ways that stripped out everything good and left only the things that break down the body slowly. He told me that people would find it harder and harder to say no to these things, not because of weakness, but because of a spiritual pressure being applied. And he made clear that this was not an accident. The enemy knows that the body is important, that without a healthy body, many people cannot do what they were called to do. And so one of the strategies is to get into the body through what a person consumes. Damage the body slowly, create illness, create weakness, create the kind of health problems that shorten life, and do it in a way that feels completely natural because it is just food and everybody eats, and who is going to see eating a certain way as a spiritual attack. But the appetite he described was not only for food. He also described an increase in appetite for things of the flesh in a broader sense, things that satisfy in the moment and destroy over time. This was going to touch both older and younger people. He was specific about that. He did not say only young people would be affected. He said the strategy would reach across age groups because the enemy does not care how old you are. He cares about getting to you. And for everyone, the goal was the same. Pull them toward things that feel good now and create damage that adds up until the time on that clock runs down to nothing. He told me how this would play out in people's lives. A person starts saying yes to things they used to say no to. At first it feels harmless. Everyone around them is doing it too. There is no single moment where it feels like a line is being crossed, but the accumulation of those small yeses builds up. The body starts to suffer, the spirit starts to suffer, and because the person is now so consumed with satisfying the appetites that have been stirred up, they are moving further and further from the things that actually feed their soul, and before long they are in a state where their life is slowly falling apart. But it happened so gradually they barely noticed how they got there. The third thing he revealed to me was something that I felt more in my body when he described it. Because this one was about destruction. He told me that in March there would be an increase in disaster coming into people's lives and homes. Not always the kind of disaster that makes national news. In fact, he told me specifically that much of what would happen would not be reported widely. It would be scattered across different places, different communities, different families. Fires, accidents, sudden collapses, smaller natural events that would not add up to a headline anywhere, but would add up to lives lost and properties destroyed. He explained that this was the devil working through the forces he has access to over the physical world, stirring up destruction in places and at times that seemed random. But it would not be random. It would be targeted. People who are on the edge of something significant in their lives, people who are about to step into something good, would find themselves suddenly dealing with a crisis in their home or their community, a property destroyed, a situation that required everything they had just to manage. And through that, they would be pulled off course, pulled away from the path they were on. And for some of them, the destruction would not just damage their property, it would take their lives. He told me that what made this strategy so effective was how quiet it would be, because when things are quiet, people do not pray about them. When there is no disaster on the news, people are not gathering together to pray for protection. They are going about their lives assuming things are fine. And that is exactly the environment in which this kind of targeted destruction operates most effectively. Under the radar, in the spaces where people have let their guard down, the fourth strategy he revealed to me was the one that he said quietly and carefully, as though he wanted to make sure I understood the weight of it. He told me about a spirit that was being sent out with the specific purpose of making people comfortable with ignoring God, not hating God, not being angry at God, just drifting, just getting comfortable with distance, getting used to not praying, getting used to not thinking about God in the middle of the day, getting used to filling every quiet moment with noise and distraction, until the quiet where God speaks is gone completely. He told me that this is perhaps the most dangerous of the four because it does not feel like an attack. Depression feels like something. A bad appetite you can point to and say that was not a good choice. Destruction you can see when it happens. But this one is invisible because it just feels like being busy. It just feels like being caught up in life. It just feels like putting God on the back burner for now and getting back to Him later. And people who would never describe themselves as walking away from God can end up so far from Him that when the other three strategies arrive in their lives, they have no foundation to stand on. He told me what happens to a person who has been pulled into that kind of distance from God. They lose their sensitivity to danger. They stop hearing the quiet warnings that God sends. They stop feeling the check in their spirit when something is wrong. They become, in His words, easy prey. Not because God abandoned them, but because they have spent so long not engaging with God that they have no practice hearing Him. And when the enemy sends something at them, they do not see it coming. And they have no habit of turning to God for help, because that habit has been worn away over time. And through this slow process of leading a person away from God, the enemy is able to guide them into choices that cause pain and loss, into paths that look reasonable from the outside but lead to suffering, into situations that bring them to places where their life ends before it was supposed to, not with a loud crash, but with a slow fade that nobody quite noticed until it was too late. I stood in that place and I took all of this in, and I did not feel hopeless exactly, but I felt the weight of it. I felt the urgency of it, because it was not abstract to me. I was thinking about real people. I was thinking about people I knew, my daughter, my grandchildren, young people in my church, neighbors, people whose faces I could see in my mind while the angel was describing what was coming, and I felt something rise up in me that I can only describe as a desperate kind of love. The kind of love that makes you want to grab someone by the shoulders and say, "Please listen to me. Please hear what I am telling you." The angel saw that in me, and he told me that this was exactly why I had been brought to that place. Not to sit in despair, but to go back, to carry what I had seen and heard back into the world that I came from. He told me that God had not left His people without warning. God was sending out voices and sending out messages to prepare people for what was coming. And I was one of those voices, whether I felt ready to be or not. He told me one more time about the importance of people knowing God's love, not just hearing it preached on a Sunday and going home with it, but knowing it personally and deeply, knowing that when they wake up in the morning, God is already with them, knowing that when they are struggling, God is not somewhere far away looking the other way, knowing that when everything feels like it is falling apart, there's one thing that will not, and that one thing is the fact that God loves them and is not given up on them and will not give up on them. He told me that this knowing, this deep personal knowing of God's love, is the one thing that cuts through every strategy the enemy has. Depression loses its grip when a person truly knows they are loved by God. The appetite for destructive things loses its power when a person is being genuinely fed by God. The disasters that come can be walked through when a person has God's peace as their foundation, and the drift away from God cannot continue when a person takes even one small step back toward Him, because God always closes the distance. And then things began to change around me again. I felt the pull that had brought me to that building beginning to work in the other direction. I was being sent back. And in those last moments, I want to tell you that I felt something I have never felt before in my life, and probably will never feel again in the same way this side of eternity. I felt completely and entirely known. Not judged, not weighed, just known. Every hard thing I had ever done, and every good thing I had ever tried to do, and every prayer I had ever whispered in the dark when I was not sure anyone was listening, all of it was known, and there was no condemnation in that knowing, only love. I woke up on that hospital bed on the 8th of February, 2026, gasping for air like I had just surfaced from deep water. The first thing I heard was a lot of noise, machines and voices. The first thing I saw was a very bright light overhead that was just a hospital light and nothing more. And the first thing I felt was my daughter's hand in mine. She was crying so hard she could barely speak when she saw my eyes open. She just kept saying my name over and over and squeezing my hand. And I lay there for a while, just breathing and letting my body remember what it was to be back in it. The pain in my side was there again. My knees ached again. I was heavy and tired and weak, and I thought to myself, so this is what it feels like to come back. They kept me in the hospital for several days. The doctors were cautious and thorough, and I let them take care of my body, but my mind was somewhere else entirely the whole time. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that place. Every time it was quiet, I could hear the angel's voice walking me through what he had shown me. And when I was strong enough to hold a pen, I wrote it all down. Every word I could remember, every detail. I wrote for hours at a time until my hand cramped up, and then I rested and wrote some more. Renee sat with me a lot during those days. She read what I wrote, and when she finished, she put the pages down very gently and sat quietly for a minute. And then she looked at me and said, "Mom, people need to hear this." She was not asking me. She was telling me, and she was right. Because what I saw was not meant to be kept between me and her. It was not meant to sit in a notebook in my house. It was meant to go out to people who are walking around right now not knowing what is heading toward them. People who are going about their lives doing the best they can, not realizing that there is something working against them that they cannot see. And I want to be very direct with you now, because I feel like there is no time to dance around it. If you have been feeling the pull of depression lately, please hear me when I say that is not from God. God does not design depression for your life. He does not want you to feel like there is no reason to go on. He does not want you to feel like a burden. That heaviness is not the truth about you, and it is not His plan for you. Please talk to someone. Please reach out. And more than anything, please let God's love in. Even if you do not feel it yet, tell Him you are willing to receive it. That is enough to start. If you have been finding yourself pulled toward things you know are damaging you, whether it is what you eat or what you look at or what you chase after for comfort, please know that pull is being stirred up deliberately. There is something trying to pull you toward things that will harm you over time. And you have the power to say no to it, but that power is stronger when you are connected to God. If things in your life have been falling apart lately, unexpected problems, things breaking down, situations going sideways in ways that seem almost too consistent to be coincidence, please do not just write it off as bad luck. Pray over your home. Pray over your family. Ask God for protection over the things and the people in your life that matter most. And if you have been drifting from God, if it has been a while since you really prayed, if Sunday comes and goes and you barely think about Him during the week, Please do not wait until something goes wrong to turn back. Turn back now. You do not need to have everything figured out. You do not need to have your life cleaned up first. Just turn. Just take one step. He will do the rest. I am 62 years old. I am not a preacher or a prophet or anything like that. I am a retired school teacher from Georgia who died on an operating table and was sent back with something to say. I am shaking a little even as I write these last words because I know how this sounds. I know some people will read it and not believe a word of it, and that is okay. I am not writing this to be believed. I am writing this because the angel told me to, because God knows I was never going to be comfortable doing this. But he sent me back anyway, and the least I can do with the extra time I have been given is use it the way he asked me to. March is coming, and what comes with it does not have to destroy you. If you know who is with you, and you are walking with him daily, you will not be unprotected. The time on your clock does not have to run down the way the enemy plans. God's love for you is stronger than anything the enemy has built. I saw enough in that place to know that is not just something nice to say. It is the actual truth. My name is Dorothy Mae Collins. I died on the 8th of February 2026, and I came back. And I am not staying quiet about what I saw. I hope you hear it. I hope it reaches you wherever you are, and I hope it does exactly what God sent me back to do with it.